Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Montes. I'm a student at Cal State LA, and I'm serving as Vice President of Legislative Affairs with the Cal State Student Association. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. And on behalf of CSU students, thank you for everything you do. When I started at Cal State LA in 2011, I did not qualify for any financial aid due to somewhat unusual, but all too common circumstances. I was fortunate to have accumulated some scholarships, and I was able to afford the first year. But when the second year came around, I was struggling to afford my tuition and fees, my transit pass, my lunch, my books, my clothing, and all the other little life expenses that add up. I was forced to make a difficult decision and take some time off college. I worked a full-time job, riding my bike for 26 miles each day to work at a warehouse for minimum wage, while saving money to eventually return to my studies. 1 year turned into 2 years, and I was worried I would never come back. Eventually, I earned enough money, saved it up, and I made my way back to Cal State LA to finish my degree in political science. My story is one that is familiar for many CSU students. We work hard and really want to cross that stage. CSU students come from a variety of backgrounds, and we see that receiving an education is an opportunity to better ourselves and our future. But too often, we get stuck in a cycle of an opportunity. Our financial aid is not enough to cover our expenses. Some of us have to work more than what is recommended by national standards, and we can't fully focus on our studies. Many of us take out loans, and we end up graduating with debt. That means that we might not be able to go to grad school. We might not be able to afford a car or a house. We might not even be able to force our own children to college. Returning to finish college, I felt very privileged and lucky, and I wanted to contribute my unique perspective to important decision-making. I decided to join student government, and I learned about the graduation initiative. I'm grateful that CSU is taking proactive steps to help ensure financial needs do not force students to leave school before earning a degree. For me, access to financial aid and class availability played a crucial role to ensure I made steady progress to graduation. Financial aid made college a lot more affordable for me, and being able to take classes at times that best fitted my working schedule ensured that I could work to make a living and move closer to graduation. To talk more about college affordability, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Sara Goldrick-Rab, Professor of Higher Education Policy and Sociology at Temple University and founder of the Wisconsin Hope Lab. Please help me welcome Dr. Goldrick-Rab.
All right, good afternoon. That was quite an introduction. I really appreciate you sharing your story. We can learn a lot from students, and it's cool to be here with Cal State, where you have almost 500,000 students. That's an amazing thing. I've been at some big institutions, UW-Madison, Temple University. You all are really big. And the scale and scope of what you can do is incredible. You know, I was looking over some numbers and I thought, how many people are there to teach all those students? There's almost 50,000 faculty and staff members working in your system. Think about the power that you have with numbers like that to change lives. I do want to talk about affordability, and I'm glad you have a lot of people, because this is a really hard problem. And it's a really important problem, because as you just heard, in the circumstance of just one person, if you can't pay for it, you can't get ahead. And to be honest with you, getting ahead right now sounds like a really big goal. It's not the only goal. In fact, I would suggest from my research that for most of your students, getting ahead isn't the focus. It's just being okay. Here's a quote from a real person I call Chloe Johnson in my latest book. She's a young woman who's now 26 years old. I met her for the first time when she was 18 years old, and she was beginning at a public 2-year college to try to get an education. And when I asked her why, she didn't give me an answer about wanting to be rich and famous, or even have a nice car, or even buy a home. And she certainly didn't talk about graduate school. She told me that she needed to go to college to have a decent life. And I asked her what she meant by decent, and it became very clear very quickly that all she was really looking for was some stability. It made sense. She grew up in a small town where the paper mill had recently closed, people were laid off, her parents had gotten divorced. They were enduring what so many Americans are enduring right now: tremendous volatility, upheaval, uncertainty. We frame everything right now as either about inequality or mobility or such, but I just want you to focus on one thing. College really is one of the only ways that people can get access to a decent life. And helping them accomplish that, being the kind of institution you are that allows people to enter and helps them to graduate, it gives them that sort of access. The problem, as you know quite well, is that despite those needs, despite the clear pathway that could help them get there, many students are leaving college without degrees and I think the "and" is the really important thing now, and in debt. That's a huge change. If we go back 30 years, there were certainly people who weren't finishing college. It's not like non-completion of degrees is a new thing, but the consequences are so much bigger than they used to be. Because leaving college without a degree, it's upsetting. It might mean that you spent time that you could have otherwise spent working, but having debt on top of that, it may mean that in many ways you're moving backwards. So this is the challenge that my research team has spent looking at over the last decade. We've been trying to not only figure out how money matters for college, but I think more importantly, and more important for your work, we've been trying to figure out what we can do about it. And I think it's so much more than what we've been admitting we can do. And the conversation about how to fix it needs to go so much further than where it's currently been. So I want to give you a little bit of background and justification for that argument, and I want to ground it in what I call the new economics of college. So the old economics of college went like this: go to college, it'll pay off. If you need to borrow money for college, well, people are getting ahead in life all around you, and we know a college degree will help you get so much further ahead that that investment will definitely be worth it. You could pretty much say that to anybody who at the time was going to college, and it would pretty much be true. And that sort of sense helped propel a movement where we moved away from grant aid and towards loans, including here in California, and we began to justify this system to ourselves. But over time, the world changed. Many things have shifted. One thing that's changed is that college prices are higher than ever, and you know that that's the thing we hear the most about. And that's, by the way, not just the sticker price. Right? I appreciate the more nuanced conversation that we're having. The sticker price is different from the price you pay after financial aid, the thing known as net price. But both of those prices are at an all-time high. But the other thing, and the thing that we don't talk as much about in higher education, is what's actually happening to our families. As I said before, they're not getting ahead like they used to. This generation may be the first to not do better than its parents. That's a very hard fact to face. That means that calculation looks different. It means we can't count on the return being there. It means there is more uncertainty. And the third part of this equation is about what's happening on the other side. There's the students, they enter the schools, and the question is, what do the schools look like? And as you all know, and yes, it's true in California, I tell people in the rest of the country that you all are struggling with this as well. They have a hard time believing it. But you aren't funded like you used to be. And that doesn't mean that we aren't spending money. You know, some folks say, well, we're just not spending a lot of money on this. If we spent more money, we would solve the problem. But it isn't just about the total amount of money. As you know, it's about the money on a per-student basis. As more and more people have gone to college, and let's be honest, as more black and brown people have gone to college, we have watched a reduction in the per-student funding put in place to support those students and to help them succeed. It's that combination of forces that makes this so hard for students like yours. It's not just being an under-resourced student, it's about being an under-resourced student in a challenged institution. That combination, students taught us through all of our research, leads us to hear the Wu-Tang Clan playing in our heads. I didn't know this song before students told me about it. Cream is so real. This idea that cash rules everything around me, you've got to take this so seriously, because it is so serious to them. It means when you wake up in the morning, you think about cash. It means when you go to class and you try to listen to a lecture, you think about cash. It means you worry about your student debt, not just when you're doing loan counseling or when you're on your way out the door to graduation. It means you think about it every night when you're supposed to be sleeping. It literally surrounds students on a daily basis. And we forget about this. You know, I got to admit, I'm guilty of these challenges. Sometimes one's research and one's teaching don't fully integrate. One time that it didn't integrate well, it was a time I was standing up in front of students lecturing in a sociology of education course, a really scintillating class. And I'm up there, and I'm looking out at the students like I'm looking out at you, and one of them's asleep. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. At the time, I didn't have much teaching experience, and frankly, I was insulted. Am I not interesting? Is this not amazing material? I started to make assumptions, like we all do. This person's just not interested. This person's not invested in school. This person stayed out too late last night partying. After several times of watching this person fall asleep in my class, I approached her and I told her to come see me in my office hours. She sat down, she started to cry. She was terrified. She was a first-generation student in her third year of college, and she'd never been to office hours. I now require it, by the way, it's not optional. What I learned from this young woman very quickly was the reason she was asleep was my class was at 8 a.m. and she got off work at 7 a.m. having worked the graveyard shift. Why was she doing this? I was perplexed. There is financial aid. I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Madison at the time. You know, this is a well-funded place. Well, as she quickly explained, she didn't get as much aid as we charged. She fell short, and it pays more to work the graveyard shift. If I hadn't asked, I would have continued to just judge. And it would have been so much simpler. What was harder was to know this was the reality and to try to work with her to fix it. Since that time, I have met so many sleeping students. I know people who sleep in class because they spend the night on a couch sleeping next to their 9-year-old and he kicks too much. I know people who sleep in class because they sleep on the floor next to their father's bed and hope he doesn't step on them in the morning. I know people who sleep in class because they are exhausted and malnourished and haven't eaten. I know people who sleep in class because they spend all night stressed out about how they're going to pay the bills for the class the next day. The sleeping in class conversation has got to change. Another thing the students taught us is how incredibly vast the misunderstandings are when it comes to financial aid and our families. How many of you have heard of this fun little phrase called the expected family contribution? Yes. Maybe you've been presented with one, something you're supposed to give up. We communicate with families about their price by telling them what they are expected to do. We don't communicate with them about their needs. That FAFSA form that we tell them to fill out is full of judgments. It's a small American bureaucratic tragedy that does harm to families all over this country every day, as it fails to actually measure their real need and judge them for their inability to put in the support that they really can't offer. We have found that not only are there students who can't pay their expected family contribution, whose families can't do it, they do it instead, but they are also tons of students, and I suspect tens of thousands across your system, who are paying for their parents while they're in school, contributing to their families, because this is how families survive. People from low-income families do not get to college unless their families have effectively made ends meet successfully over time. And sharing resources is a really viable strategy. It just doesn't stop when students enter the door of college. This is a quote from a young man we met in Milwaukee. He was 19 years old, and he was telling us about his mom, and he was telling us about his younger brothers and sisters, and he explained, "I'm having trouble providing for my mom." He was using his financial aid and his work income, and yes, his student loans to do so. At times she needs help, so I'm helping her. And yeah, sometimes I think I don't want to pay for it. I mean, he totally acknowledged he needed the money for his books. She needed the refrigerator fixed so his siblings would have food to eat. This is an impossible choice because she's the reason he got to college in the first place. When money flows that direction, it affects the students. It means they're doing something they can't talk about in front of the financial aid office because they're not supposed to be allowing funds to flow that way. It means they're not telling folks who ask them, "How's it going?" what's really on their minds. We haven't made this an acceptable thing to discuss. Next challenge. How many people work their way through college? Okay, this is how we do it in America. Working your way through college, it's our pastime. It used to work. It just doesn't work anymore. And I know we've said that a lot. I know we've said, well, you'd have to work so many more hours because tuition's so much higher. I'm sure you've heard that before. But I want to point out there are so many other ways in which work doesn't work. One way, it's just harder to find a job. Folks who are not in college are out there scrambling for those jobs, competing with your students who have more difficulty because they have class schedules to accommodate. Labor market didn't used to be so tight. We didn't used to know the night before if we need you. What is a student supposed to do who's on call for her shift during her class and has the choice of either missing the class that she's working so hard to pay for or losing her job by not showing up for that shift? When we look and we ask, are our students working? We have to go further. We have to ask how many jobs. We have to ask at what time of day. And we have to ask, if they're not working, are they nonetheless seeking work? We've uncovered disparities, racial disparities included, in who works during college, not because there are people who don't want to work or don't need to work or don't understand the importance of work, but because they can't get work. The labor market discrimination that affects them post-graduation is affecting them while they're in college. Another massive challenge is the minimum wage. I think you all know that the value of the Pell Grant has declined over time. The value of the minimum wage has too. That is affecting our students. It means they have to work longer hours in order to make the same amount of money. And when they fall short, it is incredibly difficult to find help. Most people who get through college access some form of help, but the kinds of help that they need to access, these students need to access, is more difficult than ever. Financial aid is incredibly inflexible. If you decide that you need another student loan so that you can quit your job, and you decide that in October, you'll be lucky if the money comes in by December. Okay? If you decide that you need to apply for food stamps, once upon a time you get CalFresh, you could do this sort of thing fairly easily without work requirements. Now there's a mammoth amount of bureaucracy and additional requirements that seem in many ways to disadvantage college students more than any other low-income person who ought to be eligible. And applications are everywhere. We have applications guarding resources that are as small as, say, and to ration our resources, we instead deter people from even getting these things because of the number of papers they have to fill out. And yes, every single day we still forget Maslow. I've been talking about basic needs security around the country. It feels a little different to do it in front of you all, because I think you know better than most. Cal State is way ahead of the rest of the country on awareness and education of the issues of food and housing insecurity. So I don't need to tell you, because your own researchers have done a fabulous job showing you, through their numbers, through their stories, that your students are going hungry and homeless. And it has real consequences. We should assume it does, but I have to admit that if you go out there and look for scientific literature on the effects of food insecurity on cognitive performance in college, you're not going to find it, because we haven't even bothered to assess it. And yet I can tell you from dozens of interviews and across multiple studies that when students don't have their basic needs secured, they really have trouble learning. This is common sense. What we might miss is the extent to which it leads them to feel like they should give up, that there's no point, because the system which told them to go to college isn't willing to help them alleviate the effects of poverty long enough so that they can actually complete their degrees. We can do better than this. If you want to graduate students at higher rates, you have to do better than this. But I also want to suggest this isn't just about graduating students. There's a moral imperative here. We want people to be whole when they graduate. We want them to be intact. And if they're being damaged by going without their needs met so that they can pay for college, they're not okay. So I want to push you to go a little further. I want to push you to think about literally redesigning each university so that money doesn't rule your students' lives. There are ways of doing this. Colleges around the country are doing this. Amarillo College in Texas would be a good one to look for. It is literally written in to everybody's job description at that college that it is their job to help alleviate students' financial constraints. And you can do it if you do it together. It's not one person's job. It's every single person's job. It's part of the mission. I'll give you a few examples. Connect every dot. When you provide emergency assistance to students, don't double down on the current financial aid system. If you're asking a student who wants to access $500 of support to first sign on the dotted line and take $5,500 of student loans, then you might be misunderstanding the challenge. We need to not only connect students to CalFresh, we need every institution in this system to accept EBT on campus. And the institutions will need resources and support in order to do that. And we need to extend our support to helping the siblings and parents of our students access benefits as well, so they don't have to draw on our students. We can bring in the community. We can work with local housing authorities so that they will provide spaces for our students in subsidized housing. We can work with transportation authorities and food banks, again, to provide that sort of support. This is happening all over the country. This one's pretty clear. Wherever you see it, eliminate it. If there is a piece of paper standing between a student and some money, try to get rid of it. The return is higher, the cost is minimal. Faculty, we have a role to play. Put on your syllabus not only your expectations for students to attend class, but put on your syllabus the resources around you that they could access if they don't have food or housing. Without that information readily present in something as serious as the syllabus, they might not know about it. It also helps you to become part of the culture of care, of letting them know that you do take this issue seriously. Your students across CSU are phenomenal, and they're leading. They're coming up with all sorts of initiatives. Part of your job as faculty and staff is to lift those things up and ask that they be given resources. And finally, I do want to urge you to advocate. There are so many things that we need right now. There's a long list on there. I would just mention one. The National School Lunch Program does a great job. It's not perfect. It's not nutritious food, but it is food. And every day it provides milk and lunch and even a backpack program to children. There is no reason it shouldn't be expanded. to higher education. And I see very little reason that California couldn't start by doing that with its agriculture community while we await a receptive audience in Washington. I'm going to stop there, take your questions, and thank you so much for listening. Now, I know we're tight on time, so I don't even know how many I can take. Can I take one or two? Does that sound okay? Yes.
I'll speak loud. Dr. Goldrick-Rab, we have a question from Barbara Taylor from Twitter. And the question is, how come Cal State help those students get back in and finish what they started?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting question about repatriation, essentially. Right? People have left. They left under horrible circumstances sometimes, and sometimes, frankly, they left because of something very small. I'd like to see more institutions taking action to simply reach out and ask if there are any questions that they can answer and express an interest. With them, they'd say to me, I don't think anybody cares. I haven't heard from my institution since I dropped out. So I think we should just start by calling and offering to remove, for example, a hold-on account to get them re-enrolled. Any others? Is that the Twitter stream? Wow. Cool. One last question? All right. Thank you for having me.
Let's give another round of applause to Dr. Goldrick-Rab. We will now take a short break as we transition to the room next door. You'll see coffee and desserts out in the foyer. So we'll see you in 15 minutes. Thank you.